HVAC 360, episode number 24. Toilet rooms, HVAC and plumbing. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Matt Nelson. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of HVAC 360. Greetings if this is your first time that you've heard this podcast. Please go and enjoy the rest of them. If you have been a previous listener, welcome back. This week we're going to talk something a little bit different. Most of the time we focus on HVAC. This week we're going to focus on half of HVAC. As I've been thinking about this topic a little bit, toilet rooms, bathrooms, whatever you want to call them, these are places that, really don't get much attention. You're probably thinking, what's up with toilet rooms? Why are you covering this? As a designer, I remember it's something that you really didn't think about. You think it's really unimportant. You're like, okay, well, you know what? Code requires so many fixtures. Here they are. Let's plumb them up, design them, draw them, get them out the door. Do they, water turn on? Do they flush? Yep. Okay, we're good. Okay, well, let's stop a minute. Think a little bit about toilet rooms. And here's a couple of reasons. Now, when I was developing this thought behind doing a podcast on toilet rooms, it came to my attention that actually, and I'm doing this today, I'll be published on Sunday, but today, the 19th of November, is the World Toilet Day. This is the World Toilet Organization. The WTO has proclaimed this the Toilet Day. So, happy Toilet Day to you. I guess in the same regard, I was thinking about this. I was reading my Buildings magazine, and they had an article which I thought it's a little bit obvious, but sometimes you miss the whole point. When you're in your job. A lot of times you'd go to places and you'd look at the diffusers, you'd look at, the pieces of mechanical equipment, but you really wouldn't pay much attention to, say, bathrooms. But there's really some key points that I kind of want to share with you, a little wisdom that I've seen, a couple of big messes, really, when it comes to bathroom design. But the article was dealing with a survey that was done by the Bradley Corporation. It was their third annual Healthy Hand Survey, Healthy Hand Washing Survey. And what it stated is that nearly 91% of the respondents said that they perceive businesses badly when restrooms are poorly maintained. Now, what do we have to do with maintenance? What does this really have to do with us? Just take a step back and think about it. It's easy to say that there's a couple of things that pop out at you whether they be water collecting on the floor or, there's no place to put your belongings or water collecting on the sink counter, hand dryer wasn't working, too few wash basins or sinks. Really, some of these things you really don't have any control over. But do you? Can't you use your common sense and talk to the architect about being able to change some things? And it may not be all the things that are listed in the survey, but I think there are enough things that we're going to talk about today that you can really become an advocate for. So why is this important? Let's get back to this. If you think about it, if you think about the very basic bathrooms, you'd have to go all the way to the outhouse. It's where it's outside, it's a hole in the ground, it's something that you put up with. It's just bearable. I mean, it's really functional, and that's about it. I mean, there's no messing around with it. Most people would label outhouses as gross, disgusting, smelly, someplace that, if they were locked in, it would be a punishment for a long period of time. So on the contrary, on the opposite side of it, we think about indoor toilet rooms. Now, think of the things that come to mind when you think about an indoor toilet room. You think about things like, luxury and spending, most people spend a lot of time in there, and it's someplace where you can relax. And, there's even jokes about, reading books in toilet rooms. Now, also, it's an important fact to know that of the various places, the various rooms in your house, that toilet rooms are actually if you renovate it, they're one of the few rooms that you can actually kind of get your money out of. You get it back when you sell the house. It's really that important. I mean, you think about a dirty toilet room. It's grimy, it's smelly. You just don't want to be in there. But a nice clean one, think about, a clean counter. You think about a nice toilet. Everything's comfortable. It's not smelly. Everything's clean. There's a smell of, maybe even a little smell of bleach. When you just clean a bathroom, there's that smell of bleach or some sort of disinfectant that you smell. And it really has that kind of, nice relaxing, feeling. Whether maybe you have like candles or incense that you burn in the bathrooms that, give it that kind of more luxurious feel. There's certain, a luxury that can be passed along just in a bathroom. And the difference between that is dirty and clean and some of the other design functions that really you're kind of in charge of. I can't imagine it that it's really why is it important? I think it's a subject that everybody can relate to. We're talking about bodily functions here. Hopefully you're not eating lunch right now, but we're talking about bodily function. Everybody can relate to that. Everybody's, they've told jokes about it. They laughed about it. They have, jokes about, reading material in the bathroom, or, little kids. This is like one of their first things that they find absolutely hilarious. They just can't talk enough about bodily functions. It makes them, everybody's funny about that. I guess the point I'm making is that there's a bathroom that I'm thinking of when I'm talking about this, that is in a brand new building, and when you go inside, a beautiful building, when you go inside the bathroom, the environment is amazingly impossible. I'll just kind of explain it. You walk into this room, and during the summertime, and I'm sure that during the wintertime it's just the opposite, but during the summertime, there's a full height glass wall. It's not clear. It's one of the privacy glasses, but it's right there. It's south facing, and it is just boiling. It is beating in that bathroom, and it's just, there's so many things that are wrong with that bathroom that could be avoided with proper design and shepherding by the design team. I guess my point is that these places have a set should have a set process during design with some clear flags that if you see it, that you want to make sure it's an enjoyable experience for your client. You want to be able to advocate them. You don't be steamrolled by the architect. So, enough of this little preamble. Let's get into the hardcore basics. Let's talk about the HVAC design and the plumbing design and some miscellaneous points. So obviously when we think about a bathroom and we think about HVAC, probably one of the first things that comes to mind is whether the space is going to be a positive or negative. And clearly I think most of us would agree it's going to be it's going to be a negative in regards to the rest of the spaces. You don't want any smells that are originating from the bathroom to waft out into the hallway or to adjoining spaces. That's just, it's really not cool. As far as how much, you really, you have to follow the codes on this one. But, when you talk about exhaust and you talk about locations, think about locating the exhaust grills really at the source of whatever you want to get rid of. In the case of just a standard restroom for a building, you'd want to put it over the toilets. If it's something for the home, you might think about putting it by the shower, or maybe if you can kind of position it between the shower and the toilet, it takes care of both worlds. Because really, when it comes to mechanical exhaust, I think getting that moisture out of the space is pretty darn important. As far as hot and cold goes, you want to make sure that, again, going back to that example of that bathroom with the full height glass, you really want to make sure that you minimize windows. If they have to put it on the exterior, fine. Advise them against it. But if they're going to do that, don't have a lot of windows. If they have to have a lot of windows, try to do something that minimizes the load, the solar load in the space. Because it really, if you end up either trying to heat or cool a bathroom, that really kind of fights with the HVAC exhaust of that room. You don't want to have a room control or have a thermostat trying to control the temperature of a room, supplying more or less air, being on a variable system, and then having it fight with this constant volume mechanical system. Sometimes you could actually end up in spots where you might be overpressurizing the space, or you might be exhausting more than you need to per code because you need so much air to cool the space, and in order to keep it negative, you have to have it cranked up all the time. So think about that. Minimize that solar load, minimize the glass, whether you have to put a fake wall and just have the windows on the outside and you put some sort of fretting on the glass so you don't see through, just something that separates, that minimizes the amount of glazing that's actually adjacent to that room. It really doesn't help any, a little light is fine if you're looking for natural light. But, one of the things another thing about that room is that sun. It was like 1,000-watt halogen bulb just blaring into the space, but yet the lights were still on, and this had a daylight sensor in it. It was just completely fried out. It just didn't know. It was constantly always bright, and the lights were on. That just floored me that you couldn't possibly shove any more light into that room, and yet the light was on. Getting into the control of the space when you're talking about the heating or the cooling. Let's talk about thermostats. If you have to have a thermostat in the room, okay, I would recommend against it. You could put a sensor in there, something with a blank faceplate. A lot of times, depending on the location of this restroom or what it's serving. If it's a public restroom, you certainly don't want anything that the public can just rip off the wall. I've done a lot of schools where it's you're just asking for it. Anything that they can damage, they will. So just put like a sensor plate. You just need to know the temperature of the room. And if you have to pick between a thermostat between the men's room and the ladies' room, maybe put it in the ladies' room. But there again, put a cover on it if you have one. If not, try to make it as simple as possible. Again, if you can get away with not having one at all, maybe putting in the return, maybe that's the best. If you talk about equipment, a lot of times when you think about equipment, it's all about the location. Location. And think about maintaining that equipment. If you have a couple of things that you have to keep in mind, you never know what the ceiling's going to be like. It could be a drywall ceiling, could be a lay-in ceiling. So you might have access doors, you might not. If it's something that's way up high and you're going through an access door or a ceiling grid, you may not be able to maintain that properly. Whether it be an exhaust fan or a VAV box, that might not be okay. So you want to be able to have the equipment as low to the ceiling as possible for the ease of maintenance. If you can locate it outside, even better. Get it out of the bathroom completely. And there again, if you have to choose between putting equipment in the ladies' room or putting it in the men's room, I would say put it in the men's room. That's the safest bet if you have to locate it there. Control devices. Okay, well, you talk about the exhaust fans, sometimes you can put them on an occupancy sensor, sometimes you put them on a light switch, depending on the size of the room. A lot of that, you have to deal with coordination, with the electrical engineer, make sure that they have it controlled right, whether or not it's a line voltage thermostat or something special that they have to provide. You have to make sure that you clarify with that. And, if you have it connected to the BAS, some systems you don't, some systems you do. Does it alarm? What are you reading? Are you just sending in a signal and you're reading that at the BAS, or are you actually getting some feedback from a current transducer saying, yes, the fan's on, the fan's operating, or rather than just saying, okay, well, I'm commanding the fan on, I don't know whether it's on or not. A lot of times those are the questions you have to ask yourself and be very specific when you're dealing with the controls contractor to make sure that you have everything, lined up correctly. Now let's talk about noise for a second. Obviously HVAC systems come with noise, and you know what? Actually, for a bathroom, not a bad thing. Most cases you want to minimize the noise. In a bathroom, you really want to reduce it. In some cases, it's not such a big deal. If it's like the main toilet rooms, not such a big deal with the noise. But if you think about it, if you have a bathroom that's, say, adjacent to another room, say you have a teacher's lounge, or you have a classroom, or you have some sort of other type of lounge that has a restroom adjacent to that, you really want to be able to mask some bodily functions, let's say. And so you want to be able to have that fan, be able to assist in that. There's a lot of people that are getting, would get uncomfortable if they didn't have some, fan noise to mask, to mask them. Some people run the faucet to do that as well. But there again, the noise issue. I don't think anybody likes a quiet toilet room per se. But and then ductwork. One thing that you might not have thought about before is that when you're talking about privacy between men and women's rooms, if you use straight ductwork, there might be an issue of privacy. So you might want to think about putting a bend in there just to kind of offset the difficulty of some sort of privacy violation issue. If you boil it down to that. So those are some of the things that on the HVAC side that I really can see about toilet room design. And when you talk about plumbing, okay, now this is what the plumbing design. This is really what the bathroom is all about. You want to be able to nail this. It shouldn't be that hard. It should be easier than the HVAC. But again, you need to be able to plan for it. You need to have a process that you go through and you check to make sure that, yes, okay, this is the case or this isn't the case. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is that, the thing that I ran into as a designer most often is whether or not there was a chase in the bathroom. Now, a chase, if you don't know, a chase is where you put plumbing piping, fixture carriers, things like that. And if I can take a step back, if you're not familiar with plumbing at all, typically you'd have, in most houses, you'd have floor-mounted toilets. Those would be supported from the structure below, just sit on the floor and be bolted down. That would be a floor-mounted toilet. Well, you have a wall-mounted toilet. The wall-mounted toilet, along with the urinals and some of the freestanding sinks, they have what are called fixture carriers. Now, these fixture carriers essentially are just kind of like plumbing connections that go into walls. I mean, take a Google search about fixture carriers, and I'm sure you can find a picture or two about those. So the fixture carrier needs to sit in a chase. It actually takes up quite a bit of space. And there's always been an argument between, architects and engineers how big the chase needs to be. Now, there's some, if you're thinking about ADA requirements and certain space requirements, let's back up a half a step. Bathrooms, architects will make bathrooms as small as they can unless there's some extra space that they're just going to assign to the bathroom. There's not a lot of value in making a bathroom bigger. But the fact is you need to have a minimum size for a bathroom based on accessibility. So whether or not they have you can get the wheelchair, you can spin a wheelchair around, or whether you can maneuver in there. Those are important things, and they have a minimum size requirement for that. But once they get past that, they try to shoehorn these bathrooms in. So they try to make chases work. They'll try to take as much space. They'll say, really, do you need that much space? And it's like, okay, don't argue with me. That's how big a chase needs to be. Think about it. If that wasn't the case, if you did the design and that wasn't the case, what would happen? What would happen in real life? You've designed it and the chase is too small. Well, you're going to go out there and you're going to have the plumbing contractor, and he's going to put down his fixture carrier. And that's how big it needs to be. There's no arguing. And so what you're going to have a conflict about the size of the bathroom or some other room. So pick where you're going to take the space out of in design. Don't let the contractors do that. Make the wall, make the chase as big as it needs to be. And pretty much just lay down the law on this, because if they try to cheat, guess what? The contractor's going to win. And then you're going to have the construction manager, the general contractor, resolving the issue in the field, saying, all right, the architect didn't know what he was doing, so we'll move this wall, a couple inches this way. Don't do that. Don't try to just shoehorn it in there. A chase has to be so big, and I know there's arguments about, can we get a thinner fixture carrier? I guess at that point, really, if push came to shove, maybe. But do you really want to just try to eke out, the inches just to make it fit? Just say, okay, here's how wide, the chase has to be, and leave it at that. Don't get into this argument. Now, when you talk about that, one of the reasons why, they like the toilets off the floor is that makes it a lot easier for the maintenance people to actually mop underneath. So they can mop underneath and they can kind of clean around the toilet, and it makes it a lot easier. The one thing you got to understand, though, is another thing that you should be putting into the bathroom is you should be putting in a floor drain. Because invariably, every place, there's going to be some sort of, whether or not it's a broken fixture that starts running, whether or not it's an overflowed toilet that you need an extra drain. At some point, you need a drain in the bathroom just to keep it clean. So you want to locate that by the source of water. You don't want to have the water traveling all over the place. So you want to make sure that it's just, a little off the wall, right by the toilets or, the urinals or someplace like that where, if something leaks or gets clogged, and frankly, when you put it like that, what is it going to be? Is it going to be the urinal? Is it going to be the sink that gets clogged? No. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the toilet. So if you're going to locate a floor drain, put it by the toilets. Put it in between the toilets. Just make it easy. Again, this gets into the point where, if you make it easy for the people to maintain a restroom, then it becomes a good-looking restroom and a clean restroom, and then they get the positive feedback for having nice restrooms that are well maintained, as opposed to the contrary, where they just slop some water around the floor and let it dry, which it would be just disgusting. So remember, put a floor drain where it needs to be. Obviously, with a floor drain, you're gonna have to have a trap primer, at least in the U.S. You're gonna have to have a trap primer so the drain doesn't dry out. One thing that I've heard of done is usually with like gang restrooms, there might be a water cooler that's around there, and some designers I've heard have a connection from the water cooler to that drain. So it uses the water cooler water to actually dump into that trap. I'm not exactly sure how that detail goes and what the code issues are. But I've heard of that being done just to keep the trap, because trap primers invariably fail. But if you have something like a secondary source from like a drinking fountain, then it's really not an issue. So urinals. Some things to think about urinals. Again, with the you want to take a look at ADA heights. You want to talk about regular flow, low flow, no flow. What are some of the things about toilets in that case? Now, or not toilets, but urinals. Okay. Now here's my soapbox. High flow, standard flow. It doesn't make any sense to me. Low flow, pint flush urinals. Those are perfect. It just seems like a lot. Just the right amount of water. You could go with the no flow or the waterless urinals, and those are okay. It really depends on who you talk to. I've had scenarios where I've gone into a well-maintained place, and it seems fine. I've gone into a different well-maintained place, and there seems to be a little bit of odor. Sometimes people say, hey, you know what? Maybe you should, for the maintenance people, maybe you put a little hose connection somewhere in the bathroom that they can kind of, spray down the urinal a little bit to give it a little rinse, once a day when they clean it. I don't know. That's just a thought. I've heard that said before. But, overall, am I a big fan of the waterless urinals? I personally, it's the geek in me that thinks they're cool, but it's the practical side in me that says, you know what, it's a pint flush. That seems doable. So that would kind of be, my reaction. Nothing necessarily wrong with waterless urinals, but pint flush seems to be, an easy answer that doesn't use too much water. On the other side, we have toilets. Again, we have the same ADA issue about the heights. The one great thing, when you're talking about toilets, it's just, nobody wants to be gross about it. Everybody, the professionals, they have this language that they talk about. So when you talk about toilets, you talk about solids, or you talk about liquids and solids, or waste. You talk about, the different terms for bodily functions, for bowel movements or whatever. But I just think it's you call it black water or whatever sometimes. I just think it's interesting, especially I get a kick out of this if you've never seen it, and most of you probably have. But if you haven't, I always love how in commercials, you could probably go to like Kohler.com or something like that and take a look at some of they talk about these high powerful flush toilets, and they put these little jigglers in them, or they use golf balls or something like that to show the power of the flush. I think that's it's funny what they'll throw into a toilet and say, well, look at this. It can like it's a real case scenario. And I just think it's funny. I always have to kind of laugh that they resort to this. It's like, okay, well, they got to show something pleasant and playful and throw a toy in there, and so I'm like, it's too funny. So on the toilets, you have different options as far as kind of the flow goes. You have your dual flush, and you have your standard flush, which is kind of being phased out, and then you have your low flow. So the thing about it is, I don't know. I'm not, the dual flush, I haven't seen used a lot in the U.S. I don't know if it's kind of a thing that you have to kind of get used to. It would seem to me that it would be simple enough, because that's really, that's the option. When you talk about a low flow fixture, if you have solids, it might take a couple of flushes. But, all in all, I think that there's cases where a single flush will do. So, you'd use half the water that you'd usually use. If you used it twice, then oh well, you had to use it anyway. So I think that the low flow is fine. Dual flush is probably a valid option. I always thought that was kind of interesting. I heard about the sensor technology. You can have a dual flush sensor technology, and that kind of depends. I guess that's activated by time, which I thought was interesting. So if you're there for a little bit, that means you went number one, and if you were there for a long time, then you were there for number two. So there you have it. I guess the one thing, and I'll just point this out from my own personal experience. For toilets, the one thing that I found interesting is I tried to get a low flow toilet for my home, and I ended up getting a Kohler unit. Now, I've never had any troubles with smells. All the toilets have been pretty good. They've been very cleanable. I have other Kohler toilets that have worked just fine. But I have this one, and this is one where it has like the class 12 flushing system. No, it's like class 5. But, it has one of these, the massive flushing systems. And it has this, occasionally it has this odor. But what I've kind of deduced, I played, Sherlock Holmes a little bit. The regular standard, the only way it comes in is it comes in the elongated bowl, which is a little kind of oblong. As opposed to the standard round, which is, of course, round in the front. But the elongated bowl, this is the only way that the Class 5 in this particular model came. And it has a different kind of internal, flushing system. So there's actually like little channels in the front. Well, it's my kind of assumption that those, bacteria can actually start growing in those if you don't, use them for a period of time. It might be like a little area of uncleanliness, so to speak, and you'd get these odors, and frankly, it drives my wife crazy. But I think that when you keep it clean, it's just something to be aware of, that there actually are these little extra, waterways. In a elongated bowl for some of these floor-mounted, flushing systems. So, for what it's worth, there's been issues. I think it's interesting though, the difference between some of the toilets. If you watch the flush, so to speak, some of the toilets, they're kind of violent with 12-gallon flush, or the standard 3-gallon flush. You typically have a decade ago, and that was kind of violent, and it was long, and it was drawn out. Nowadays, you kind of wonder how these low flow fixtures actually work. Like, okay, I see the jigglers in the toilet, and all of a sudden they disappear. But really, how does that work with real people? And what I found, it's actually kind of interesting. I always wanted like a powerful flushing system, but these flushing systems that they've come up with, they certainly do. The way they have the trap shaped and everything like that. It seems like it just kind of slightly floods the bowl, and then everything just disappears. And it's really kind of ingenious that they've managed to do what they can do with as little water as possible. So I think I've probably spent enough time on toilets. So thank you for my putting up with my little rant there. Now the sinks go. Really, this is one that you're going to have to work with the architect about the sinks. Usually, the architects are going to say, okay, whatever urinal you want to use, whatever toilet you want to use. There's not a lot of choices, so you pick what you pick. But again, be conscious of what you're selecting, and there are some things that you need to think about when you're selecting them. But the sink is one variable that really the architects will pay a lot more attention to: the sink and the faucet fixture. So really coordinate that with the architect. But one thing to realize is think about how this area is going to be cleaned. How is it going to be maintained? A lot of people have like shrouds underneath the sinks, and sometimes that hides some of the fixture stops or some of the mixing valves or some of the other equipment that's there. And sometimes these shrouds are easy to remove. Sometimes they're really, really difficult. So whether or not you're going to have a sink that actually is freestanding, whether you have one that's a drop-in or one that's an undermount, these are all things that you want to be considerate about, because it's that was one of the items on the list when they're talking about the different things that they don't like about bathrooms. One of them was the water collecting on the sink counter, which I thought was interesting. I've also heard stories that really you have to be cognizant of who you're actually serving in the space. And what I mean by that is that if you pick a fixture that is kind of a little splashy, well, if you put that in a place that's really fancy, that's bad, because people don't, when they're wearing their fancy attire, they don't want to get splashed. So you want to be able to kind of have something that's low and kind of just works in like that. So just be cognizant of who the clients are that are going to be using these bathrooms, and select something accordingly. To the contrary, you really want to make sure that if this is for some place that's a little bit more public, you want to make something that's a little bit durable. You want to select something that's durable. You think about handles. Really those are just kind of levers that people can break off of. If you're thinking about schools, or whether it's like a public park, it just some of these fixtures, some of these fittings, just kind of lend themselves to a little bit more abuse. You might like the gooseneck, fitting for the fixture, but it really might not necessarily apply. Also, if you're using sensors, and you say, okay, I'll get rid of the handles, I'm just going to use a sensor operated, you got some choices to make there, whether or not it's going to be a battery powered, or whether it's going to be electric. And is that coordinated with the maintenance staff? Are they on board with that, or have they had some bad experiences that they say, you know what, I've had enough of changing batteries in these faucets to last me a lifetime. You better get it hardwired. That's something that you need to coordinate with the electrical to make sure that gets done, so that everything goes okay there. Now, I guess one of the last things I'll talk about with the fixtures, one thing I found rather interesting is that when I was testing some fixtures, these faucet fixtures, and this is kind of, I don't know if it's neither here nor there, but just an observation that I had. These fixtures have, they just, the flow gets lower and lower, and they have these certain aerators that restrict the flow. So you're pretty much down to nothing. Now, there's two things that really, I guess, you should be aware of. If you're going to have that, like if you have a low flow aerator with a sensor, you're going to end up waiting forever, because that's for hot water, because that sensor is going to time out. You're going to get this and it's going to go off, and you still don't have water, so you have to and you try to keep faking it out and getting more and more hot water. I've sat in places, and this is actually the same bathroom that is my example bathroom. I sat there for probably about a minute and a half just to get the water up to above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the hot water, and the thing was, it's like, you were like, well, there was a recirc system that was installed there, and you're like, well, then it wasn't working. And it's like, no, that was working fine, but if you take that low flow, how long does that take you to get hot water at that fixture? Think about that. It just doesn't work. The same thing, I guess the other point with the low flow fixtures is, if you have these point of use water heaters, they won't activate. You have to have a lot of these. Think about that when you're using point of use electric water heaters, like underneath the countertop. Make sure that your lowest flow can activate that unit, because if it can't, guess what? It's not worth a hill of beans. It's not going to do anything. It's never going to activate. So you're going to be having some serious problems. All right, moving on to finishing with the toilet fixtures. There again, I always like to see a nice bead of caulk around the around the urinals, around the base of the toilets, just to make it finish, just to make it clean for maintenance, so they can kind of mop around that without having to kind of just shove dirt kind of in the cracks and crevices. Now, the one thing I've heard on a couple occasions when you're talking residential is that they don't like you to caulk around the base of the toilet. Specifically, because they want to know that if it starts to leak, that it's just not rotting out inside underneath the toilet. You can actually see the water kind of leaking out there. So, just something to think about when you're talking about residential. Let's see. Now, I guess the last thing is just remember the clean out for the bathroom. Sometimes you put it on the floor. Again, you'd probably want it in where you have some space. I mean, think about a person who's actually going to clean it out. You don't want to just kind of tuck it in where they can't get to it. It's going to be a messy process where they're going to bring a machine in to do some snaking of the drain if it's clogged or something like that. So you want to be able to make sure that you have some room around the clean out for that, whether or not it's kind of behind the wall in one of the restrooms or on the floor. Just think about where you'd put a clean out. And again, if you had a choice between the men's room and the ladies' room, put it in the men's room. Some miscellaneous things. Okay, here's some interesting things that I found about toilet room design that I'll pass on. Now, I guess when you're talking about public places, some of the things that you might not have thought about, but I'll pass on because I thought they were rather interesting. If you're talking about illegal drugs or different activities like that, there was a tendency to, if you had sort of like a tank type toilet, you could use that to, I guess, and I'm not necessarily giving you tips and tricks if you're a drug dealer, but I'm just pointing this out to you as the engineer, that's something that, if you have the choice between using a tank type and using some other type of toilet, if it was your option, either, it might be a pressure issue where you can't use a flush valve because they certainly require a certain amount of pressure. You might have to use a tank because of that. But if it's something that you could probably conceal within the wall, maybe that's a better option than putting it out in the open where people could actually use it as a storage device for whatever. And also, I guess the same goes for ceilings. If you have ceiling tiles, if you have a public space, think twice about putting a lay-in ceiling in a public restroom that's maybe out. And I'm talking more or less things that are out in parks and things like that. Not necessarily in buildings, but certainly that could be the case too. But above ceilings, if you have lay-in ceilings that are low, you could also have that as a place to put things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I'll pass that along for what it's worth. Obviously, in the vein of keeping down the odor, I think the one thing that has entertained me quite a bit is the bucket of ice in a urinal. And that usually was restaurants or bars where they have an ice machine. Some of them will actually take just a bucket of ice and just throw a bunch of ice in the urinal and let that either keep down the smell or just if people aren't flushing, it just helps out there. Again, just an observation that if you've never seen it, then I don't know, it's just entertaining. Other things, you want to make sure that if you're dealing with areas that are subject to freezing, you want to be able to make sure that you keep your pipes located properly. Keep them out of the outside wall. If they're underground or if there's a crawl space, you may want to insulate the pipes there. If you have an option, you want to take as much care as you can to prevent pipes from freezing, because typically in a toilet room, you want to make it bulletproof. You don't want to have the maintenance people worrying about this time after time if it's going to end up freezing. Typically even like in sinks and rooms, you want to avoid, pipes in the outside walls. It's just a bad idea all around. So use like a little extra time in design to try to, coordinate that so you can kind of get it in a safe place, and where those are. Saves on a bunch of extra other stuff that you might use, like electric heat tracing in the outside wall, or additional pipe insulation. Other thing that is interesting, obviously, floor slope. If you have a shower, an ADA shower, this is kind of one of those things that the ADA shower with no threshold. So you end up having just a kind of curtain knocking down the water, and the water kind of starts running out. You want to make sure that you're very careful in your specifications on how things are pitched. If you have an area of showering that has the shower drain, you may want to have in an adjacent space, you may want to have a secondary drain to catch water for people who dry off at that location. So there again, just realize that water. You don't want having water, and I've seen it happen where the water just kind of migrates out of the shower and takes a beeline for the door and just kind of goes right out the door of the bathroom. So you want to avoid that happening. So those are my miscellaneous design tips. So what's the takeaway, really? Have a process in place for laying out your bathroom. We get back to that. Have a system in place for laying out the bathroom. You really want to be able to meet your client's needs. Make sure that they have something that they can be proud of, that they enjoy using, that they can they don't dread going to the bathroom and making a short trip of it. They can. It's something that they can really they enjoy. Because it really can it affect you all around. I mean, if there's some toilet rooms that you see and you're like, I got to wait for this one to open up, or I just can't use this one. I got to use another one. That you have like toilet room preference because of the way it's laid out, or how much it gets used. So there's things that you got to keep in mind. Oh, one point. I'll go back to this on the plumbing. Make sure that you have shut-off valves specifically for each bathroom group. Obviously you're going to have shut-off valves for each, fixture stops for the fixtures, but have shut-off valves for each group. And, if you need an access door for a drywall ceiling, make sure you have that specified as well. So one last tip for the plumbing side of things. You don't want to have to shut down the entire water for the entire facility just because you don't have shut-off valves for that specific bathroom group. Let's see. So laying out the bathroom, having a plan, meet your client's needs, and for heaven's sake, stand your ground with the architects, help them out. They want a bathroom that's looks pretty just as much as you do, but they may not understand the certain nuances when it comes to toilet design. So, having said that, I'm going to stop. We're about at like 48 minutes here, and that's probably longer. If you're still listening, I appreciate it. You're troopers, and I hope you actually got something out of this. If not, just had a laugh or two. So that's pretty much it for this week. If you learned something, if you need somebody or somebody who needs a little help with plumbing design, pass on the word, send them a link, tell them where to get it. I'd appreciate that very, very much. And again, I think of your if you want to work on your own networking skills, connect with me on LinkedIn. Or connect with me at BuildingX on Twitter if you do that. If you don't, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to issue one. It's probably actually going to be very soon, so it might be another month before you get a newsletter. But hey, I always like to get back to people right away and say thank you. So if you want to sign up to the newsletter, look at my blog at www.buildingx.co. So I guess that's pretty much it for this week. Until next time, remember, know what you build and share what you know.